Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into a completely mind-blowing analysis of J.R.R. Tolkien's universe. We're looking at how language in his work doesn't just describe the world, it actually, literally builds it. We're going to see exactly how a master philologist constructed a reality where syllables themselves carry structural destinies. It's fascinating stuff, so let's get into it.
Okay, let's just start right here. Why on earth would a master of languages like Tolkien give his two main villains names that are so easily confused by new readers? I mean, on the left, we have Sauron, the big bad, the great enemy, and on the right, Saruman, who is initially an authority meant to resist him. For honestly almost any other novelist, giving two enormously important characters such similar-sounding names would just be an obvious amateur mistake.
Now, you might just assume they share a linguistic root in the fiction, right? But they actually don't. Sauron is a Quenya word meaning the abhorred, while Saruman derives from the Old English saru plus man, basically meaning a man of skill or cunning. So even though their in-universe historical origins are totally different, their extraordinary phonetic proximity acts like this hidden linguistic trapdoor. The resemblance completely survives the explanation.
And this brings us to this really cool concept called configuration history. This is the idea that a word might have one stated historical root, but it acquires a totally separate structural reality by the time we actually hear it in the story. It proposes that syllables actually function as operators, predicting a character's destiny. But to understand how deep this really goes, we have to look at the very foundation of this entire universe.
So, Section 1, the cosmic blueprint, music, fracture, and creation. Let's zoom out for a second.
Creation in this mythology didn't start with, matter or stars or planets. It began with an expressive, musical structure. Ilúvatar proposed themes, and the angelic Ainur made music out of them. But the very first evil wasn't a physical war, it was a linguistic act. Melkor attempted to make his singular expression dominate and just overwrite the diverse harmony of Ilúvatar. Ilúvatar's unity generates plurality, basically saying, many voices belong to one song. Melkor, on the other hand, says no, the song should become my voice.
Because Melkor, who later becomes Morgoth, cannot truly create anything new, he has to just inject himself into what already exists, and this forces a recursive fracture. Morgoth disseminates himself into the world to control it, becoming less whole in the process. Then, Sauron inherits this exact same method, but he miniaturizes it. Sauron concentrates his potency into the One Ring. Both corrupted beings compromise their own independent identity to gain external power, making the ring essentially miniaturized, recursive Morgoth technology.
Moving to our next section, phonemes predict character arcs. The fall of the namer. Let's look at our first major case study.
Remember that configuration history concept we just talked about? Well, phonetically, Saruman arrives in the text as a Sauron man, way before he actually falls. His name has completed its destiny before his character even has. Eventually, Saruman gazes into the Palantir, which is basically a linguistic and semantic mirror, and he sees Sauron. He sees his own potential corruption, intelligence converted purely into control. He collapses into a lesser, recursive imitation of Sauron, fulfilling the phonetic destiny of his very own name. Saruman's most uncanny weapon isn't actually fire or lightning, it's his persuasive voice. He industrially corrupts language. He appropriates Sauron's black speech, like using the word Uruk-hai, and he literally renames the world until its destruction sounds like perfectly reasonable administration. He breathes and categorizes altered beings, manufacturing distinctions for pure utility. He is, at his core, a dark namer. Look at this incredible downward trajectory. When Gandalf breaks his staff, Saruman completely loses his authority to impose form through words. The great namer collapses into a slang nickname bestowed from below, first Sharku, and then the humiliating Sharkie. And the ultimate vicious irony here? The wizard whose supernatural weapon was his persuasive voice is viciously killed by a servant, literally named Wormtongue. The instrumental tongue destroys the voice. The recursion just closes perfectly.
And that brilliantly sets up our next section, the Gollum shadow, identity residue, and terminal sounds. Let's examine the phonetic descent of another incredibly famous character.
The crucial point here is how transformation preserves lineage in Tolkien's world. Look at Smeagol. He doesn't just get some random, unrelated replacement name. The Goll acts as an identity residue carried forward directly from Smeagol right into Gollum. The addition of lum creates this terminal, swallowed sound. It completely mirrors his descent beneath the mountain. He contracts, he goes underground, he is literally beneath the lum. The name literally closes around him. Furthermore, the name Gollum echoes Golem, which, if you know Jewish tradition, is an artificial being altered and animated by language. It also strongly echoes the word gold. This perfectly captures a creature whose entire ontology has been swallowed up by the precious object he possesses. Preciousness totally owns him, not the other way around.
All right, let's zoom back out for our next section, the linguistic trapdoor, 11D1 and structural fields. Let's see how Tolkien planted structural trapdoors right inside the English language.
Notice how ent, the word for Tolkien's tree giants, is a perfect anagram of 10. Both intuitively relate to branching forms. Think about it. Trees branch outward, human hands branch into digits, and those 10 digits naturally count. Tree and 3 occupy this incredibly neighboring phonetic territory in English. It's not that some ancient humans sat down and planned this. It's that physical realities create survivor pressures on how our language naturally evolves.
And Tolkien kicks open this trapdoor with Bilbo's famously confusing joke, his 11st birthday. Look at this structure. 20 is functionally 2T, 30 is 3T. Tolkien treats English morphology like it's an executable rule, basically proving that the letter T behaves as a structural operator for 10, seamlessly linking these concepts together in an adjacent functional space. It is absolutely genius.
Which brings us to predecessor identity, transformation preserves lineage. This links all these phonetic coincidences together.
The foundational architectural law of Middle-earth is that transformation always preserves lineage. Nothing becomes something else without carrying a piece of the past forward. Sauron's entire philosophy is encoded in this single, famous sentence that acts as a structural operator, one ring to rule them all. It's an attempt to collapse plurality beneath one single will, taking Morgoth's fracturing operation and creating a fatal one-token dependency.
At the absolute core of all of this lies the deepest philosophical opposition in the entire mythology, the actual meaning of the word one. Ilúvatar's one is a composition that embraces difference, where the many exist beautifully within the whole. But Sauron's one is a false, coercive unity that demands the reduction of the many to himself. False unity destroys difference, which is exactly why the ring and Sauron's entire linguistic ambition must ultimately be destroyed. Now, I know what you might be wondering at this point. Did Tolkien consciously sit down at his desk and map out every single one of these phonetic equations, like ENT being an anagram for 10, almost like it was an algebra problem? Well, the incredible answer is, he didn't necessarily have to. Whether he consciously scribbled it out on a scrap of paper or not, his generative understanding of language was just so profound that syllables naturally act as architecture in his work. Because he spent his entire life studying how words change while carrying their ancestral residues, the structural information literally carries ahead of the plot. The master of persuasive speech is killed by Wormtongue, whether Tolkien explicitly mapped out that linguistic irony or if his sheer linguistic instincts just guided him there naturally.
And this brings us to the real climax of our analysis today, beautifully summarized by this quote. In Middle-earth, language remembers. It inherits, it divides, it corrupts, and it restores. The word is not just some convenient label slapped onto a character. It is the very fabric of their destiny. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought for you to ponder. If Tolkien's universe shows us that words truly participate in making the world, that renaming something actively alters its reality and its destiny, what structural destinies are we building with the language we use every single day? Think about the categories we create and the names we apply in our own lives. What realities are you speaking into existence?